elephant in the room, which is the impact of COVID-19, particularly when we're looking at the economic changes in our economy and their impact in education. You couldn't imagine a poster child like COVID-19. It's a remarkable set of developments. It's radically changing in a big way, accelerating a lot of things that are going on. It's of course noteworthy as a terrible set of challenges with great human cost, but it is also an extraordinary set of opportunities. We've confined, like the elephant in the room to the corner, we've confined a discussion of those changes until this last session, but we certainly didn't want to leave without dealing with them. And we could, of course, only begin to scratch the surface. And it's all new and happening fast, but what's very clear is that online learning, as important as it's been for a long time, is taking on a remarkable new role in everybody's lives. Ready or not, here it comes. So I asked, in fact, even just this week, I should mention, asked John Sonnenberg, who's got a remarkable career, frankly, in online learning. I could barely scratch the surface. I could say, of course, he's with eDynamic Learning, one of the nation's leading providers, the leading provider in some areas of online learning. He was for years with Pearson in a similar sort of space. He's worked with the Illinois State Board of Education. He's been a school superintendent, and the list goes on and on. He's also a remarkably well-connected individual and has assembled a panel of really a blue ribbon panel of people with lots of expertise in this space. So John, let me pass the torch to you. Thank you for assembling this panel, and we look forward to all you have to offer.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really want to thank the panelists that I'm bringing on board, and I know Jennifer's on board, and I see Shannon, and I'm not seeing Rob yet or Ken Olson. So if they're here, I hope that they're available, but we'll start with Jennifer and Shannon. Keep an eye on the chat area, because I'll be popping some stuff in there as we go through this process. But I just wanted to say, yes?
John, let me just note that Ken is here,
Okay.
and Rob, if you're here, we'll need you to pop into the conversation, because I can't see you either. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We're getting there. Rob was, his father's furnace went out on him. So, so life happens when you had other plans. So if he doesn't make it, that's why. But hopefully he can join us soon. You know, I'm currently the regional manager for eDynamic Learning, and my mission literally has been for 45 years has been to transform education through technology. And I've seen more progress in the last 45 days than I've seen in the last 45 years. And this event is a clear example of the change that's going on. But when you expand it out to the millions of students now who are not in school today and normally would be, we wanted to think about what that means and get thoughts from some of the thought leaders and even get some of their feelings on this so we can capture this moment in time. So what I'm doing is I'll be posting up in the chat area some questions, and we're going to start by just having them introduce themselves. And as I do that, I'll post their bios. So let's start with, how about Shannon? Are you there?
I am here.
Awesome.
I am Shannon Dick. I am the innovation specialist for the Department of Education. I have only been with the department since January, but I have taught for 19 years and also have a unique perspective in that I also teach online, which you can see my background. This is actually my at-home classroom. I teach online with Chinese students. So as an online teacher, we've been dealing with the COVID-19 virus for several months. So seeing how Indiana has handled e-learning versus what I've seen in China is quite different. So
Okay, and let me go on to, let's see, Jennifer, are you there? Jennifer, I know you're there.
Am I unmuted now?
There you are. Very good.
Okay. I thought I unmuted myself, but anyway, I have been with the department for 2 years. I'm the current director for curriculum and instruction, which recently includes not only all of our content areas and our content specialists, but so that includes now STEM and digital learning and early learning. So we have quite a few specialists that I work with in all of those areas. Before coming to IDOE, I was a high school math teacher and also building and district leader in an urban setting here in Indianapolis.
And Ken, you're up.
Good morning. I guess it's good afternoon at this point. Time flies.
We're in a global world. You just say good day.
My name is Ken Olson. I'm one of the assistant principals at Plymouth High School. Prior to coming to Plymouth, where I've been for 10 years, I taught social studies, business, English as a new language, or at least made an attempt at Bremen High School. And then I also helped to get started their credit recovery program. And I work with John through our credit recovery program at Plymouth now.
And is Rob available yet? I don't see him. Let's see. I will attempt to, if Rob joins, let me explain why. I reached out to Rob Tidrell specifically because of his background as a technology director, but also because he's a certified educational technology leader. That's a designation from an organization called COSIN. And they're a national organization that's been promoting education. If you ever heard of E-rate and one-to-one movements and those things, that's all stemming out of this COSIN organization. And Rob has earned this CETL, which is actually was harder for me to get than 2 of my doctorates. So there's a lot of admiration in my mind for Rob. So if he is available and come on, he can speak to a whole range of online issues. So let's move on though, and let's start with the first 2 questions that we had, which I will post them in the thing. You guys have already taken care of a little of this, but I'm more interested actually right now in the second question. So, what are your thoughts and feelings of what's going on with this whole change? So, who wants to start? Do I pick? Shannon, you're up.
I think it
Ken's
has
smiling
been.
because he's glad I didn't pick him first.
I know, it's always me. I think that it has been quite eye-opening for school districts who were not doing e-learning prior to this week and having to really be under the gun to figure out a solution for what looks to be an extended period of time. And it has been quite a learning curve for our department at the DOE, as well as we figure out how we can best support schools and teachers and parents during this time. On Monday, we already knew that most schools were going to be closed for this week and that we were coming into spring break. So our team worked very quickly and very hard to come up with a website to help both parents and teachers to assist them with resources for e-learning.
Jennifer?
So yes, our team worked super hard to get some resources available for teachers. But what is hard right now, I mean, there's pros and cons to what's going on in so many ways. Like there's so many companies giving free resources, free access to so many wonderful platforms. And yet, if you've never done e-learning or you've never used any of those platforms, and then it's completely overwhelming. And this is not really the best time to be learning new, like a lot of new platforms, right? So we've been trying to really be thoughtful about what we are putting out for teachers, trying to limit it a little bit as to what is on the website, and not just also providing resources for teachers, but also providing resources for parents in this time. So I don't know, I mean, we continue to want to add to that, but it's really been a challenge to think about what do parents and families and then also educators need most at this time. It's not always a bunch of free resources. It sometimes is going to need to be the support for how to even best implement that. On another note, Shannon already alluded to this, we have districts all over the state that are not prepared for e-learning in that they just don't have one-to-one devices for their students to use, or they don't have the infrastructure in their counties for students to be able to use it. So just trying to think through those things and how we could support schools and families in that as well is really important in this time.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. I heard a superintendent the other day. It was I think the term he used was virtual vulture vendors, I think what he was saying. And so I just want to make it clear that our company is kind of taking a different route. We're just here to help facilitate communications and help in any way we can. We know you guys are buried, so we'll save the PowerPoint presentation for another day. But right now, I think it's more important to hear from somebody who's actually in the trenches right now, and that's Ken. He's front line with his teachers and with his students and with his parents and community. I'm excited that you're here to speak to this question. So, Ken, go ahead.
Thanks, John. I think we were kind of a unique situation. We knew that we would start spring break Friday, so yesterday, and that we would go until March 31st. And our initial plan was to come back the 31st. So, last week when we were kind of getting this, hey, we're going to have to be out for a while. We had a work day with our staff, and our biggest thing was we came in and we wanted to do a couple things. We wanted, number one, reassure them that they're really good at this to begin with. They've got some skills. They've done this before. They know what they're doing. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we need to smooth it out a little bit. There are some bumps in it, particularly when you're doing e-learning multiple day after day after day. We saw that last year when Plymouth had a flood and we missed about a week of school, and trying to do 3 e-learning days in a row. It becomes hard on students, it becomes hard on parents, it becomes hard on staff. And so we really wanted to be sensitive to those 3 things. And we wanted to reassure them that, okay, we can do this, everything's going to be okay. We're not reinventing the wheel, we're just kind of tweaking it a little. Now that we're going out until May, I think that same approach is going to be a pretty big piece of how we go forward. We're not going to try and reinvent this. We're going to tweak it, and we're going to smooth things out for parents and students and take into account the different situations that they're in as well as much as we can. So last week we focused on one lesson for the 3 days. Give one lesson. They did that on Tuesday. Wednesday, the work was due, and we used Thursday to follow up with the students who hadn't completed the work yet to see, hey, what can we be doing to help you? How can we assist you? Were you able to get on? And then trying to run paper packets and things like that out to people to really adapt what we were doing to kind of take care of some of the equity issues. And those, I think, are going to be some of the biggest things going forward, is that ability to understand that we're building the plane while we fly it, and be flexible and be willing to try some new things, but also not overwhelm it. So I think we had 3 different ways of doing meetings like this thrown at us in the last week as an administrative team. All are really good tools. We need to pick one, and that's the one we train our staff on. Not, hey, here's 3 things you can use, or here's 6 things you can use, so that they get to the point. Sometimes too many choices is too hard. I mean, we've all stood in the cereal aisle going, when your favorite cereal is gone, going, all right, what do I get now? And you feel that overwhelming feeling, or trying to pick a movie on Netflix this week can sometimes be overwhelming.
Yeah, and Ken, and thank you. I appreciate that. My personal view, though, is I love new things. So this is kind of exciting because I've learned more in the last week than I did in my doctoral program. But it's one of these things where a lot of people aren't like that, and we've got to recognize that. So if you guys could, expand on that, and Ken, why don't you're on a flow. Why don't you keep going with question number 3? Now that schools are closed, share some of the detailed efforts that you're making for online learning. And if you want, you can expand into 4 and 5, and they're up on the screen.
So with us being, out this coming week, the first week that we now know that we're going to May 1st, I feel very fortunate we have some time to start to think and to put some of these things through. I know our teachers are probably using their spring break time to do some of that same thinking and things like that. We know we'll have a PD day when we come back, but one of the things we talked about as an admin team was, again, this idea of how can we, make the wheel roll better rather than reinventing it. And one of the things we did want to look at is how we're looking at school and days. So we feel very grateful to the Indiana Department of Ed that we have those waiver days. I want to thank the 2 of you that are from the Department of Ed for those. I have a brother and sister who teach in Illinois, and they don't have that luxury yet. And so we have, the ability to set a schedule where we could go Monday, Wednesday, Friday with classes, with online, take 2 waiver days each week to have some PD opportunity, a chance for teachers to develop things, a chance for teachers to connect with students in a more one-on-one way, to give them help as opposed to like a mass class thing. Have what we're going to call office hours for teachers, where they're available to those students certain times of the day to connect, and be able to kind of start to ramp this thing up in a real thoughtful way. So we started looking at what do those lessons look like, and we want to really, and this came from one of our teachers in our meeting last week, we want to focus on the power indicators. We need to really go back to our curriculum and look at what is essential for students to know about each of those topics, and how can we deliver that in an effective way, both in an online format, but for our students who don't have online access, how can we get that to them on paper or in some other way that they can then continue their learning as well. Equity is going to be one of the big issues that we're going to have to solve, not just as a society, but as a school system as well, really specifically, of how in this time do we kind of make sure the playing field stays level for all of our students, that everybody has those opportunities to continue. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday will be kind of class days. The idea of introducing that power standard on Monday, on Wednesday doing some guided practice with students, and then Friday being a day for them to be able to show that they are mastering that standard, that they understand it. And that doesn't necessarily mean a test. That could be a variety of ways to interact with that and demonstrate your learning. Is what we want. And then Tuesday, Thursday, chance for you to set up individual appointments with students to work with students who need more help. Our special ed teachers are getting trained in how to use Google Meet so that they can set up online meetings where they can look at student work and work with students that way, as well as our ENL program. So I think we have a decent proposal to start with. It's a nice place to start, but we all understand that as we go, we're going to have to be flexible and adapt. And I really look forward to that first Tuesday we come back from break, when we can get some teachers involved in some of that planning, kind of roll this out as a proposal and see what great ideas our education professionals have. Because, you talk about me being in the trenches, they're really in the trenches, and they're going to come up with creative and innovative ways that everybody may not see. The great thing, Alex, or what's his name, Chorus, always says, the most smartest person in the room is the room. We have a great room at Plymouth, and I feel fortunate to have those people with me.
How about challenges, Ken?
The how do we get learning to students who don't have access is a big challenge. And I think there are some resources out there that we haven't tapped into. I think South Bend's been real innovative with the buses. I know Warsaw's doing the same thing here, where my daughters attend. I think that's a great way to do it. Unfortunately, we don't have that. One of the things I want to do this week is I want to look at the telecoms, because I know they've said students can have unlimited data, but I don't know if there's a way you sign up for that, how that gets activated, and then more importantly, how we can push that out to students. And then even the idea of, what do we do about our families that are on a pay per minute plan where they get X number of minutes for the month? Has that changed? Because I don't know the answer to that. And so that's our biggest challenge right now, is how do we get our students the materials they need and the supports they need if they can't get into the virtual environment that we're creating?
And could you talk, what's the bus thing you're referring to in South Bend?
I believe, and I thought I saw an article about this, I know they're doing it in Warsaw, that the South Bend buses and the Warsaw buses are equipped so that they can be like a mobile hotspot. So they could go park in a neighborhood, and for 200 to 300 feet outside of the bus, you're able to get into their Wi-Fi system and then use your iPad. I know at Plymouth, our Wi-Fi extends from the schools into the parking lots. So we've had students who have come by with their iPad, downloaded their work, sat in their car, downloaded their work, and then, gone back home to work on it, or sat in the parking lot and work it too. So I think things like that, you have a chance to bring some of that equity in. If we can somehow get Wi-Fi connectivity out to the families that don't have it. I know Comcast has expanded their low-income free internet program during this time, but even then, you got to get it signed up. You got to have someone come out. You got to have somebody hook it up versus, taking a bus and parking in the neighborhood. That's just a really innovative thing that I commend both South Bend and, Warsaw on utilizing their buses that way, that are capable to do this.
Yeah, I keep seeing necessity being the mother of invention. I don't know. I think there's some argument whether Plato actually said that, but I know it's true. And I think we're going to see from all sorts of different people how to finish this last mile issue, because it's been out there for almost 30 years now. How we're going to get that last mile, and today now we have to. So I admire what you guys are doing. Do you have some top recommendations for educators to support learning? Stuff what they can do to especially include all the different electives and PE and CTE and all those things, the experiential type of programs. How are you? It's one thing to teach math online. I'm sure Shannon probably can talk about some other things she's been doing around the world, but how do you address the fitness programs, the culinary arts program, those kind of things? Or don't you know the answer yet? I mean, I'm just.
I think that's one of the things we're looking into. I know I looked at our PE teachers' lessons this week, and we have 3 PE teachers. We had 2 different approaches. One of our PE teachers, who also they teach health, took a very SEL kind of approach to it, and it was, what do you think about what's going on around you? How do you feel the nation has responded? How do you feel the schools have responded? Plymouth has responded. What concerns do you have in terms of your wellness, your fitness going forward? And then he had a question about, they do a lot of weightlifting, so they're supposed to max. So what should we do about maxing to get their input when we come back? I had the other group, they had students, we need you to go outside. We want you to get a half hour of exercise. You can count walking the dog. You can go for a walk, go for whatever it is, and little reflection on what you did, and maybe a short little video of an activity that you did so that you can see what you were doing. I talked to a PE teacher from LaPorte, and they're doing things like having their students design a wellness program for being contained in a house. And so what would the exercises you could do be? So how, if you don't have a weight set, what are things you could lift instead of the weights? And then maybe you create that program and then demonstrate some of the activities. So I think there's some innovation that'll come along with that. I think same thing, with culinary classes. I think you can have the students, explore some recipes or create a meal plan for your family and then cook the meal for your family and have your family write a critique of your food. So I'm looking forward to the innovation that our teachers come up with. The ones I'm more concerned about are courses like our welding class or our CNC manufacturing class or our building trades class, where it's hard to get that equipment to the student. It's hard to replicate those environments in a home and those skills that they'll be using for those. And so there are some solutions we do need to start seeking out.
So let's talk about, have you guys begun discussion in your district about, I think, what's Indiana right now? Is it May 1st? You guys are supposed to be back? Okay. What happens if they say, hey, we're done for the school year?
Well, I hope the model we're working on right now is some that could be sustainable through the end of the school year. I know we have enough days with the waiver days that we could get to our last day doing the 3 days a week. But I think it's a changing situation. And as we go, even with the plan we have, that's going to need to be tweaked. And I think we're all going to have to be really flexible. The other thing that we can't anticipate right now, and we talked about this in our first staff meeting, we wanted to make sure our staff was okay. We wanted to not overburden them. We know that some of them have health issues. We know that some of them are now going to be trying to work from home with their grade school age kids with them and having to do e-learning with them as well as do their e-learning for our current students. And we also know that things will change as we go. And I don't know if the socioeconomic impacts have been seen yet. We may have families that right now socioeconomically are okay, that because of the changes in the work environment and jobs may start slipping into those at-risk categories. And how do we respond to assisting them? And I think that's the longer we push this out in terms of the school, we're going to have to be adaptable to the changes that are occurring within our school districts and within the families in our districts and being really attuned to that. I know we've talked about trying to go out and survey parents and try and get some feedback on, is it too much work? Is it too little? How can we support them at home? I know that we are doing some SEL things with our guidance department in checking in on our teachers and our students and actually trying to build that a time into, if you want to call it a daily online learning schedule, where there would be an SEL period where the guidance counselors would be available for students to do some SEL lessons that we could deliver virtually, but also to talk to them and connect with them and make sure that life is going okay for them as well as doing that with our teachers.
Okay. And Ken, thank you very much. And by the way, people are chatting. I'm trying to capture your questions. We're going to save those for the questions at the end. So don't think I'm ignoring, Rebecca and other people. We'll definitely take care of all that too. So let's jump. This time I can pick on Jennifer. So, you got the whole list of questions on the screen, but thoughts from the perspective at a 30,000 foot level, what are you seeing?
Sure. We are, well, again, we're just trying to figure out the best way to support schools and teachers and families in this time. So there's pros and cons to the way that our whole system is designed, right? Like we have a lot of local control. I think it's great that schools have local control, and yet when that is the case, we sometimes struggle to put out guidance because that is really prescriptive, because then it seems like we are usurping that, right? So if I could say, I love Plymouth's response to the 3 days a week, I think that seems like a really healthy response. I would love to put that out there as what I would consider, a best practice, as opposed to trying to enforce something every day or 5 days in a row. I think that, taking a look at those smaller chunks and looking at what's really like also what Ken said in terms of just those, whether it's the power standards or things like that, what is it that you really feel like kids need to make sure that they have before they come into school next year. That is certainly something that needs to be considered. We've got a lot of interesting things in the state. We've got school districts that are one-to-one, but then the community is so rural that there is not access anywhere. And it's actually so rural that, while it's great, I love the bus parking different places and things like that, but that's not going to help these communities either because everyone is so spread out. So trying to figure out those infrastructure issues, and it's great. There are providers providing free internet access, but if you don't have the infrastructure at all in your community for those providers, then that's not helpful. So helping people think through how they can provide offline activities, I think is going to be important. I definitely, I've seen some things in the chat about parents and things like that, and I don't know what the I don't know what what a reasonable expectation is, but I do know that a lot of parents are feeling the burden of making sure that their students are getting online and doing what they need to do. And so, thinking about what I had even said before in terms of, new platforms and new things, if you're a high school student and you have 6 or 7 different teachers, and if there isn't a common platform in use in your community, like you could have 6 or 7 different platforms that you're trying to navigate. And if you're a parent that has a high school student and a middle school student and an elementary student, you could multiply that over several times in terms of like what might be needed for families to try to navigate. So I do see 4 critical things in terms of students being successful. If a student has reliable access, if they have to the internet, and when I say reliable, I don't mean over a phone service. Like browsers don't work the same on your phone as they do on other devices. And then you have a device, you have a school that's offering great lessons, and you have a parent that's making sure that you're highly engaged in doing them. You might come out ahead in these next few weeks. But if one of those pieces is missing, then it can be problematic. So thinking about how do we shore up those areas, I think is a big challenge. And it's one that we just have to be thinking about now. And if we get through this time, we need to have a plan should this ever happen again, kind of thing. Like, long term, what do all of these things look like?
Excellent. Shannon, first of all, I love the teacher material behind you. You might want to explain that a little bit. And but also your perspective on these questions.
Well, my background is because I teach mostly younger, like I think my oldest student is 14. So I teach mostly younger Chinese kids English online. So that's why I have the more generalized primary resources. I have noticed that during the times that China has been on essentially a quarantine lockdown, that these kids, they were still doing just as much, if not more work, as well as taking more classes online. And I could tell a difference. And I think that that's something that we are trying to be very cognizant of, is that I could see a difference as time went on over these months, that these kids were really worn out. They were doing stacks and stacks of work on paper, and then doing 3 and 4 half-hour online classes every day with English teachers. And I think that that's something, at least for me, I'm trying to be very cognizant of the resources that we're sharing. We don't want to overwhelm anyone. And I know my team has also we've been participating in a lot of webinars to get more familiar with some of the newer resources that are free for right now, so that we can better help educators and parents.
Yeah, that's really important. I think we need to keep in mind the virtual recess
Mm-hmm.
That's out there. It's we in education, we kind of often will just dump a lot of this online to people, and realize that chunk learning is still a vital part of the process here. How do we break it up? And I think, Ken, speaking to your SEL and some of those other issues you guys are trying to face through this process are going to be important as well. I do want to keep moving forward with this, so I'm going to go to the next question. Let's see. Okay. Basically, how are you going to, well, let me add a little background to this question, okay? A recent UK study by WHO and others stated that in an unmitigated epidemic, we would predict approximately I'm sorry for being so morbid, but a 500,000 deaths in Great Britain and 2.2 million in the US. This is from the WHO, a well-respected organization, and not accounting for potential negative effects of health systems being overwhelmed on mortality like we see in Italy. The report also states the major challenge of suppression is that this type of intensive intervention package or something equivalent effective at reducing transmission will need to be maintained until a vaccine becomes available, potentially 18 months or more, given that we predict the transmission will quickly rebound if interventions are relaxed. The report presents the concept that schools may not be back to normal next year, note 18 months. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I'm actually sheltering in place. I'm state of Illinois is in kind of lockdown right now. I couldn't run out to Home Depot right now if I wanted to. And so it's one of these things where life is changing. And what this report is saying that this may not be a short-term thing. And if it's not, there's no harm in planning. You're not going to, if everything, goes away and everything's fine, life goes back to normal, no one will criticize us for planning at this time. But if it does go south on us and next fall starts up and we haven't had the thought experiments, the Gedanken, as Einstein would say, of what does this look like in the longer range. And I put that in light of yesterday's report from the federal government that they're not going to require end-of-year testing this year out of the feds. And, that is a situation that is problematic on a whole range of levels in education. So I'd like to hear from each of you your perspective on this. And again, if you don't mind, Ken, I'd like to pick on you just because I always loved your analogy. We're building the plane as we fly it, and I told Ken when he told me that, he says, "Yeah, but I will always fly the big red airline." So, Ken, thoughts?
Well, I appreciate that, John. When you first put this question out to us, it as I said to you, it stopped me in my tracks. Because I don't know that we've all fully thought beyond this window of a couple weeks, 8 weeks, May 1st. Initially, it was, most schools around here were looking to come back somewhere after Easter. And I think it's going to take a lot of flexibility. It's going to take a lot of being willing to let people try stuff and fail forward. Is a concept we talk a lot about at Plymouth. The idea that just because it didn't work the way you want it to work the first time doesn't mean you didn't learn something from it and can grow from it. So I think that's going to be it. I think for some of our classes that are more lab-based or more experience-based, we're going to have to look at what online resources are out there in terms of a program type piece that we could use for people to work with for a longer period of time. How can we leverage some of those resources that are there? I think it's going to take some really, probably more than schools have ever done, outreaching to parents and seeing how we can equip them to best support their students. My youngest daughter is a sophomore in high school, and she had an e-learning day yesterday. And I had come home from spending some time in the office and had asked her, how are things going? And she's like, I have no idea what to do with chemistry. And I watched the video and I just don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so, when you've gotten to that point, and unfortunately I work in this field and I have some resources of people I could call and say, hey, explain joules to my daughter in a way that she might get. My sister teaches bio and chemistry. But it really becomes, how can we support parents so that they can feel confident in helping their students if we are going to do this on a long-term basis? And then also really looking at how we look at the model of schools and how they work. I live in a house with a college-age daughter and a teenage daughter. If I see them before 11 o'clock on a day that they don't have school, it's a miraculous day, or something might be wrong. And so how we look at education not only needs to change in terms of what we're delivering, but maybe where some of the learning occurs and things like that, and how we can flex to, get teens when they're most productive, or get teens where they're most helpful, or acknowledge that we have students who they're doing lessons for their younger brothers and sisters right now. And so how can we balance a calendar so that maybe elementary e-learning days are different than high school e-learning days? That you balance the grade level so that somehow your older students can be assisting younger students, and younger students then are not, for lack of a way to say it, causing the high school students to get stressed out about, I got to help you and I got to do my work. And then, you have parents who are stressed out because they're worried about their kids getting an education and they don't have the tools. So how we can build tools within the households, I think, is going to be a real challenge as we go further and further on in this line.
Okay. Jennifer? Thoughts?
Yes. Well, I think I've already mentioned it in terms of the, just the concerns about the equity issues, and those are the things that I think need to be addressed if this is going to be a new norm. We also, I feel like right now we're in a situation where this is just going to, the further exacerbate the differences between the haves and the have-nots, right? So how do we mitigate that? How do we, schools are so much more than just a place for, to impart learning or whatever, right? They're social centers. So how do we make sure the social emotional, needs of the students are being met? How are we making sure their physical needs are being met? We've had conversations about, how do we, those students that we have concerns about that may be in even abusive homes or things that we've been looking at, how do we keep track of those kids and make sure that they're safe? Because schools really in the last, maybe forever, but are more than just about that education. It's also about all of those other things. And so with that, I just think that doesn't mean that it might not be the new norm. I just think we need to expand what we're thinking about in terms of how does that become a new norm? How do we make sure those other things happen in addition to the learning? So I don't know that I have answers for that right now. I just hope that this will be the opportunity to keep exploring that. But I think that the first thing is really talking about how do we make sure students have devices? How do we make sure they have access to internet? And then how do we help train teachers, and hopefully not in a time of high stress, right? But in normal circumstances, how do we help train teachers to make sure that they would be prepared if it was more of a new norm?
Yeah, and I really like that the phrase this like an opportunity to explore. Maybe that's the moment in time we have right now is that opportunity, so that there's probably a teacher out there that's been thinking, oh, could we take all my experiments and somehow put them in a box and ship them to the home and do it that way, and then they would just get delivered from home to home, and they never thought to bring that up, but now they would. I think those ideas, we have to, as wacky as they may sound, we may have to explore some of those things and see how we can do that. And I guess my question, Jennifer, is really from the state end. What do you see the state asking for? Is the state looking at guidance from the federal government, or we're looking at this becomes the new norm, we're going to have to kind of readdress the funding processes that may be in place, and at least some of the criteria to that funding? Any discussions like that yet, or those? What kind of questions on that level do you have?
So I think that I want to be really careful and really clear. The people at the Department of Education have been working around the clock over the last week with the governor just to try to meet immediate needs. We are really in survival mode. We have to figure out like what is happening right now, you know, making sure our students are safe and well fed, as well as maybe hopefully getting some education before we could really start thinking about long term what this would be. We're trying to think about, we are looking at places where for just this immediacy right now, we have to look for waivers. I mean, obviously the state assessments are one of those things, but I mean, when I tell you it's been around the clock effort right now, it truly has, just to try to make sure that we are doing what we need to do for students in this moment. I think when we have the chance, when we feel like we've taken care of that, right, and then we will have the time to say, okay, now if this moment is now longer, what does that look like? But I mean, there's been a lot, 7 days a week going on right now, just trying to make sure that, you know, I mean, there's already been that done, is where I guess I'm going with that. There's already been waivers given, you know, state or federal funding is tied to the fact that we give an assessment at certain grade levels. So that has been waived at this point in time. You know, there's different funding tied to attendance and you're only getting that money if there's actual attendance. And so those kinds of things have been waived at this moment in time. I mean, all of this stuff has been done. Right now, we can only think of it as for this moment in time, but as this goes on, of course, those conversations will continue to happen. But it's been pretty fast and furious for a week, and I think you got to give us another few weeks to get some of this stuff, like, you know, ironed out, and we can say, okay, if this becomes longer term, or if this is something that we have to consider, you know, anyway. But it's been pretty fast and furious just on the immediate concerns right now.
And I specifically wanted to probe you on that a little bit because
Okay.
in my past, I've been in your shoes as director of e-learning for the state of Illinois, and I know what I'd be doing right now if I was at the state level, and I would have less hair than I already have. And I think it's a matter of everybody on this call, there's like 141 right now, it has to recognize all the heroes out there that we have, because as I always tell people, I've never met a person that went into education for the money. We have an intrinsic goal here. And I admire, especially at the State Board of Education level, where you have the DOE, both the federal and the state level DOEs, they're unsung heroes often. They don't actually get to see the kids sometimes. And one thing I miss about education right now is I'm not directly working with students, with one exception. I do have a class of 60 kids that I'm actually helping to teach online. Anyways, but it's one of these things where I want you to realize that I think everybody's in this together, and we're going to have to kind of mutually support each other. So I want people, you know, make sure that if you have an idea for the state, share it, but make sure that it's a constructive concept. So, right?
Well, and if I can jump back in again, just really quick, I mean, I want to definitely, like John said, if you've got something that you feel like we haven't thought of, please share that. I mean, whether it is support that you need, or whether it is some, you know, restriction that you see as a barrier that we should look into removing that we haven't figured out, we certainly want to do that. I don't want to make it seem like, you know, we have thought of everything, because I'm sure we haven't yet, but I just want to make sure it's clear that we're definitely having all those, you know, ongoing conversations and truly trying to meet immediate needs right this minute, as we then look to, you know, figure out longer term needs, right? So please share those things if you do have them. We are working really hard to make sure that you have the support that you need, and that we are removing all barriers that you know, that might exist for schools.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jennifer. Shannon, you want to add on and pile on and hopefully address your creative ideas?
Well, our creative ideas are listed. Christy Hilton posted in the chat the link to the DOE's list of resources. I do want to say that I totally agree with Ken that we have to really communicate with families and find what needs are out there so that we can help. I think at the end of this crazy tunnel that we're on, I think in the end, I think it's going to be great for all school districts because of this absolute necessity for communication between families. And I think parents are really going to, if they haven't already, they're really going to have a better understanding of education and what goes into teaching students, and we'll have much more parental support across the state.
Yeah, I think that's great. And could you guys also speak to the role of the parent now? We're looking at 20% unemployment rates coming up. You know, your role traditionally in schools has been, you know, childcare, nurturing in some aspects of this. That's kind of changing. Well, not kind of, it is changing. What are your thoughts on that being part of the new norm, the role of the parent? Just Jennifer, you want to start?
Sure. So, you know, it's I think that's a really difficult discussion to have. I personally don't have my own children, but I do. My 3-year-old niece lives with me, and I know how challenging it has been this week to work from home and have a 3-year-old want your undivided attention because you're home, and so you should be able to give it. So I think that family engagement is always important, no matter what kind of time that we're in. You could say it could be more critical now, but the truth is it's always been critical. I just think that we have to, I mean, as we consider our e-learning schedules or different things, I think that we do have to be cognizant that we have parents that are trying to work from home as well. And so what do those schedules look like? How can we help parents navigate that? What resources and supports can we give? And I'm saying we, maybe from the state, but also from individual school districts, right? In terms of how do we support how do we support that? So I just think family engagement has always been critical. You can argue that it's more critical because teachers have less direct contact with their students, but I mean, we have to again realize that we've got parents that are trying in many cases to do 2 jobs at this point in time.
Hey Ken, real short, what's your answer to your parents?
Yeah, I think Jennifer hit on a lot of really good things there. I think schools always talk a lot about parent engagement, and I think the higher you go up in the grade levels, the less parent engagement there is. A lot of it is parents start to feel that the kids can handle things on their own, and I think a lot of that's going to have to reverse. We're going to have to get to a point where we are in very much regular contact, not just with our students, but with our parents, and trying to see what is it they need, what supports can we give them, and even supports beyond the school. It's been great to see all the schools in the area that have been doing free lunches and free breakfasts and continuing that. And even, just kind of people are showing up and, hey, we're getting a name and we're handing out lunches. How many do you need for the week is kind of what Plymouth was doing. You can come every day or we're going to give you a week's worth. I think that's just the start of it. The school is really going to have to take a central place in the community as a hub of support for the community, both in resources like food, but also in resources of how we can support our parents and our students so they can continue learning and growing into this time, but also making sure that they have the things that they need for life. We're going to probably look a lot more like a social services organization than we ever have before.
Yeah, good point. Last comment on that, Shannon, and then I'll move on. Anything on the parent new norm question?
No, I think it's been covered.
Hey, good. Okay, so let's. So that was my, effort at kind of shocking the world a little bit, but I wanted to move on and think positively. We're going to get past this. This is not like when the Depression, what my dad told me about how bad it was in the Depression, or, those kind of things. It's more like the polio era that I was born into. My class was the first class in history to go to school without a polio victim. And yeah, it changed everything. And I see the availability of a vaccine fairly soon. And as soon as that's introduced, life will turn around. Your thoughts on, is everything just going to go back to the way it was? Or how will this shift education? How is this going to affect things? Okay. Shannon, I did pick on you last time, so I'll pick on you this time.
With my newness to the department, I'm going to defer to Jennifer on this one.
Okay. All right, Jennifer, go ahead. And very well done, Shannon. Go ahead.
So I think that I hope that this really gives us all the opportunity to just think about education outside of the box and what education can be. And I hope it gives us the opportunity to challenge just the norms and the status quo, and really look for that innovation and look for, ways. Earlier today, the conversation was about, preparing for the workforce and things that support the economy and things like that. So I really feel like this is the opportunity to look for ways that we can make things, actively make things more relevant for students. I mean, if you're thinking about online learning in terms of how you might assess learning, maybe a test that we typically have given in a brick and mortar classroom isn't going to be the most beneficial, because there's so many ways that students can cheat, right? So how could we have them do a project and do something that then demonstrates their knowledge? And doesn't that also serve the purpose of then what we really want happening in terms of STEM education, in terms of the soft skills that were mentioned earlier today too, in terms of all of those employability skills and things that we want students to learn. So I hope that this gives us the time to really think outside of the box for that, and then we can take that back, whether we are continuing to do more online learning or whether we are, back in the school. I hope that we'll be looking at things from just a much more innovative way.
Interesting. I appreciate your perspective on that too. Ken, what's your thoughts on the day after?
Yeah, I think Jennifer hit it really well. The idea that this is a time that, how can we look to be innovative? How can we try some different things that maybe in the past we haven't been willing to take that next step. I just have a lot of faith in the education professionals we have around the state. I think we have people who are very dedicated to this cause and to their students. And I think they're going to find a way. We had one teacher in our building that has come in and, while we were still at access to the building, came into his science lab, and I had a student had to get a notebook out of there that they needed for work. And I walk in, he's got his phone on a tripod and he's up there recording lessons that he can put out in small snippets to students. He already uses Twitter when students have questions that he thinks the whole class needs. He'll record himself giving a demonstration or an answer, then puts it out on his Twitter feed. That he was doing this before we got to this point. So I'm excited to see what kind of innovations the great professionals we have in the state can come up with. I'm also looking forward to see how we can use some of the online tools that are already out there to train students to step in as situations change within the community. Right now, there are all kinds of pictures going around the internet, of like healthcare workers with signs like, "We come to work. Can you, to make sure that, we're healthy, can you stay home?" Right? Not overwhelming that system. Is there a way that we can be training students right now with some of the CTE software and things that they could fill in and fill some jobs that we may have struggles getting people in communities to do, so that they can assist as healthcare workers, as that system starts to reach a max capacity point, be able to step in and give relief, either some days off or some time away, or just being able to assist doctors and nurses in the things that they're doing, training that we could get them in right now in an online environment. And what other ways can we do that to try and look at the needs of the community and have students step in? So can we train students to do wellness checks on elderly neighbors in their neighborhood, whether through like a virtual digital environment? Is there a way that we can teach people to connect? Just doing things like this And having this connection has been really good for me. I've been able to see a variety of different people face to face, have some conversation beyond, and I love my family, but beyond just talking to my family or beyond just watching a Netflix movie with my family. This whole idea of Netflix now having movies that you can watch together and communicate while you're watching it is, I haven't done it yet, but I'm like, we need more things like that that provide connectiveness in our isolation.
Mhm. Yeah, and I really wanted you to get to some of that community, how can we help out kind of thing, because like there's a lot of talk about how we need more ventilators, and so we're doing this massive effort to build machines, not realizing that we don't have people qualified to monitor them, or even people to help them, set them up and just observe what's going on. It would be just helpful to have an extra hand around. And it'll be interesting to see how, not just high school level, but, second year students at college and stuff like that can start being part of the solution. It'll be one of these things too, where on the long run of this idea of having partnerships with the business community, and I know there's, Kate and the group out there right now. I think there's a huge value out there for integrating more and more what we're trying to do in the business world along with what's going on in education, so that we can address some of these problems. I heard a story the other day about some kids writing an app in New York that so that people can request buying groceries, and then these high school kids and so forth are running out and getting groceries for people. So those kind of things are going to be important elements to this whole process. So we've got like one more minute. I've got a bunch of other questions, but I'll save those for the question. But let's wrap up. Definitely, equity. I heard equity issue. If you want to speak to that, if you want to speak to ingenuity of the state and where you're going, or maybe just one last comment out of each of you, that'd be really great. Anybody anxious to start? Make me pick again. Okay. Jennifer, you're smiling. Okay, good.
Okay. Well, I do
Jennifer,
think,
you probably sat in the
is,
front row in school, right? You probably sat front row, and you were the one that got the A, and right?
That probably is true.
Yep.
I also tend to have a lot to say, which may not always be great. So I just think this has been a great opportunity to talk about a lot of these things. It's been exciting to see what, even through the chat, what other districts are doing. I just want us to, I want to just reiterate that the department wants to support you, whatever that is right now. So don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. Know that we are having ongoing conversations about some really pressing, matters for students right now, like even graduation. But no, let us, know how we can help you. I do think that this is an opportunity to be innovative, like we said, and, thinking about STEM and what this forum is about initially, like just thinking about how, problem-based learning and how this could be that in action, right? Like if we were thinking about the problems that are now existing in our communities right this minute, if we just unleashed our students to start working on some of that stuff, think about how powerful that could be. So that would be my parting thought, I guess.
Yeah, I like Mary's comment on the chat. We could crowdsource supplying masks, and we, if every student did a, art craft of, 10 masks and dropped them off at the hospital, that the mask problem would go away.
If I can tag on to Jennifer talking about how we can throw this into a problem-based learning or project-based learning, as the former STEM teacher, this just totally fits into the design process. And think of a problem, how can we solve it? Let's test it. Does it work? What changes can we make? And that's really what this whole situation is.
Ken?
My final thoughts are really along this lines. We've spent the last probably year and a half seeing how divided we could have in America be with this election that's coming up. And this is really a time more than ever that we need to see how united we can become. And you're starting to see that in bits and pieces around the country, and it's been awesome to see. I think education, because of the way it's connected into communities, connected to local people, it's a chance for education to really come to the forefront and kind of drive some of that building of community, building of togetherness. And I think the more we can look at innovation and how we can adapt to the environment and be flexible, I think we can play a lead role in helping our students prepare for a world that's going to probably be a lot more different than it is the same than the world that we were living in prior to this happening. I think the last thing is we really do need to look at models that show flexibility, but also that we're taking into account where our students, where our parents, where our staff members are, emotionally, mentally, in terms of their health as things change, and being willing to adapt our system, adapt our laws, and adapt our communities to respond to those challenges as they arise, because there are probably going to be things that come up that we haven't thought of or that we can't even think of right now. And how we can be flexible and adapt on the fly is going to be a big piece of how we overcome all this.
Hey, I just saw Rob Chitro. Is that you, Rob, at the bottom down there? Are you online? Or there's somebody down. Who's this? I thought that might have been Rob.
Sorry, I haven't seen him.
Okay. That was somebody else then. I saw somebody pop up on the screen. I thought maybe that was Rob. So anyway, well, first of all, I want to thank the panel. I think they did an outstanding job. It was a nice cross-section of Indiana educators and a few people. Certainly a nice representation of an outstanding collection of educators. Since I deal with 8 states, best part of my job was traveling around and meeting with educators like you guys. But now my best part of my job is being involved in discussions online with people like you. So thank you very much. I've got a bunch of questions. If you got a little more time, and Tom, I don't know how you want to handle that. I could go through the questions that were in the chat room, or do you want to just open it up general?
You bet. Thank you, John. We do have more time. I appreciate that people have other things to do, and if we lose you, we lose you, and we thank you right now. We scheduled to end around 2:30, but to John, I suggested that we let this session run a bit longer, and let's do that, John, with questions. I've got a couple, just to throw a couple pieces in the hopper here. I asked Chad Adey to come in, representing South Bend Schools. He's, of course, a CTE principal, but he's also part of that leadership team dealing with this crisis. And so, Chad, I'd like to hear from you. And also, we had a request from, is it David Mylander, who's got we've managed to unmute to let in for a question also. And then, of course, there are questions in chat, John, you're right, that we haven't got to. Yeah. So maybe if we start with those first two and then move to questions in chat, that would be great. Chad, to you first.
Yeah, so really, I'm going to defer to David because he is the epitome of an expert in the room. Our best solutions are not going to come from the top of our districts, from no disrespect from downstate, but it's going to come from our classrooms and us unleashing and supporting and releasing the very best need for each of our teachers and giving permission. So I'm going to defer to David first, because in our system, he's one of the epitome of folks who are innovatively, flexibly shifting to meet the needs of his kids.
Super. David, I'm trusting that you can get in. Maybe I need to unmute you again. And I'm looking for help maybe from Richard Allen in the background. I'm finding myself unable to unmute David. Permissions issue. But so I can promote to a panelist. There you go. And now you can do it yourself, I think, David. and maybe not. We'll keep working on that. David, please cut in when we solve this problem.
Yeah, so I'll dive in for just a moment. Really do appreciate at every level where the efforts that are being made, and I agree with Jennifer that, gosh, it's been triage at best, and really just digging in. We have so much ground that we're going to learn from over the next many days. I would love to hear a little further personally, because we are in a highly urban environment. This has been a painstaking time as far as being really concerned for a lot of our populations, special populations, populations that are on the edge so often. And I think in a lot of our programs, it's the kids who and our teachers who are innovative and who are persistent and are driving to get things done will rise to the day, but still very concerned about a wider range of our populations, that we don't leave a bunch of kids behind at this moment. And for those ones who do depend on our physical presence in the classroom, that often support the home environment because it's the most positive thing in their day. So I'd love to hear some ideas or thoughts in the immediate, how we reach a wider range of kids that we may not be reaching right at the minute.
To the panel.
Well, I would love to know if, I guess maybe I really need to let Ken talk about how they might be doing it in their district, and I'll not talk for a minute if Ken has some things to say.
Yeah. Chad, first of all, because I had one of those senior moments, can you repeat the question real quick?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like in your area down in Marshall County, we in the urban environment have those families that so often in crisis times are not gaining access, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think this moment in time is really like pulling the Band-Aid off and showing us this is a very difficult time. So just looking for creative ideas and ways that we can reach out. For instance, in South Bend, we are meeting the needs of kids with the Wi-Fi on the buses, and with feeding throughout the district continuing and all that sort of thing. But we still really have, at the end of the day, so many of our classrooms have been the one support that was consistent in many of our kids' lives. So just your thoughts going forward. We have 6 weeks here with a lot of kids that are kind of going to be wondering what the next step is and what their current step is.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any greater answers than some of the stuff you guys have already been doing up in South Bend and that we've seen across the state. I think, the continuing the food is a great first step. I'm excited that, we have a guidance staff that wants to be so involved with what we're doing virtually that we're going to try and create, like I said, an SEL hour as part of our day where, they can put out some SEL lessons, some things that students can be doing at home to kind of work on stress and things like that, but also that they're there to connect with the kids. One thing we really emphasize to our teachers with the Thursday, the last day of our first 3 learning days, was we really want you checking in with kids. We really want you to make every effort to reach out and connect with them, and not just a mass email to every student who didn't do your work. Right. We had our teachers making phone calls. We did a quick video on how to sign up for Remind and get a Remind account so that they could text them directly. Our technology department, we have not rolled this out yet to staff because we didn't find out until late on Thursday about it, but our technology department has an app that it's available through our phone service system that they've made available to teachers, where you can put the app on your phone and it looks like you're calling from your school extension as opposed from your home, from your cell phone, which I know sometimes teachers are very cautious about that. So opening that up to where you can be making a call from home, but it appears it's coming from the school, and being able to talk to those students and reach out. I think the more we can find ways to connect with those that we know are most at risk. And by the way, our teachers are our best people to know who is most at risk in our community. They see it every day. They work with it every day. And so we need to give them the tools that they can keep in contact with those people. I think that's going to be probably the best thing we can do in terms of, like you're saying, trying to bring some equity, is finding out what's going on, finding what those needs, and then how can we as a school, not just a school in terms of the school building and the administration, but a school system, how can we get resources to people that we need them to get them to, not just necessarily from the school, but what do we have from our community and how can we connect people to resources that way? Again, the kind of idea of the school as a social services hub.
Excellent.
I think, I wonder too, as Ken was speaking, I think all those are great things. I wonder if there is a way to leverage support staff in a different way too. Like, I mean, a lot of our IAs are hourly employees, but they work with a specific number of students. So could they also be getting touch points with students and parents, or even our secretaries? You know, our kids are frequent flyers in the office. The secretaries know them, right? So how could some of those things be divided out so it's not even all the teacher, but it might also be providing ways to keep some others employed in the school in a certain time right now too. So that anyway, those are just some things that came to mind as well as Ken was talking. We've had conversations with the social emotional behavioral wellness department at IDOE, even talking in some cases, and this is a little bit tricky right now, though we don't have a shelter in place order at this time, but are there kids we actually should do home visits on? Do we need to actually send someone and knock on the door and make sure that they're physically, well? And again, you may have staff members that aren't comfortable with that right now, and I respect that. I don't want to, but that's something that has been talked about in terms of making sure that we're giving access to those kids. In addition to some of the other special populations, I know that we are working hard to take a look at, to continually add resources for English language learners to our website in terms of some online supports for that. Also special education. The Patents Project has put out a lot of things to make sure students are getting access to the right kinds of software and technology they need to make sure that their computers are accessible if they are, whatever their impairment might be. And then there was, and I know even High Ability has been releasing something. So those are three of our more special populations that we're making sure to try to provide resources around as well.
Kenneth and Chad, I wonder if either of you have heard of or have already begun implementing reaching out to other community leaders. I have in mind pastors, rabbis, park leaders at the Charles Martin Center in South Bend, et cetera. You can fill in your own local leaders. And a lot of those guys also know the youth in the city really very, very well. They don't know all of them, but they know a ton of them. And they may have resources. I don't even know what you can do. You could imagine going door to door, right, with an assignment or at least a conversation, a word of mouth conversation at 10 feet away, right, for knocking on doors. You can imagine some kinds of points of contact like that other folks besides teachers might be the contact for.
I know Amy Porteous, who's our director of guidance, she's done a really good job of creating a resource hub on our website, and she's in constant contact with a lot of the different churches and groups that work with people in the community with that, as is our superintendent, Mr. Hartley. I know he works and talks to the town council and the different resource places there. So I think some of that is beginning. I think it's going to be, how do we go deeper with that as we continue to move forward to beyond just putting something up on a web page of here's where you can get help, but really connecting with people and directing them. And again, I think it's going to take a whole community effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would agree in South Bend, one of the benefits of being in this community, as you saw throughout the webinar today, we have an exceptional group of connected people, from our chambers to our pastors to our community leaders at every level. and then really within our education community. And we've seen, at least in my first year here in the South Bend schools, an increased level of connection, if you will, with that community and our schools, and really commend those folks that I work alongside, Dr. Todd Cummings, the executive team, and our board, really have been reaching out overtime, trying to make sure that we are being responsive to the needs of the community. And I think the one thing I really appreciate is that the attitude is increasingly people rolling their sleeves up, seeking to make those connections, and understanding that the only way we're going to truly get it done for every child is a more collective approach. And so it's not easy work. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is worthy work, and work that really we must continue in. The social distancing is a particular challenge right now, and I think in the days to come we'll see what we can and can't do within the parameters. But I think in the immediate, the best ideas still are going to come, at least for our students, still are going to come from the belly of our teachers and those administrators in our buildings who are charged with making sure that no one drops off the face of the map in this moment.
Yeah, and if I can add to it, I think they're also going to come from your parents and from your custodians and from your cafeteria workers and
Absolutely.
your secretaries. You know, the custodian is going to step up and say, hey, this is the time to train me on biohazard materials, and this is the time I could go volunteer at some health center to help relieve the staff and their issues, and use it as professional development for everybody.
Yeah, just yesterday had that conversation about in the midst of all this, what would it look like to have every student, every high school student go through OSHA training? Yeah. Not most folks won't think about that, but in the midst of this, we could provide it. OSHA training that would set up kids to understand safety and the features of that, and then open the doors up to our, just one more connection into our industry community, and understanding that they are a part of a greater and dynamic and positive community. So, and that came from really one of our district level leaders who is just thoughtfully in this moment slowing down enough to go, gosh, there is more that we can be doing for our students. It's outside the box of the brick and mortar.
Yeah, and I think thinking about things like, you know, what would schools of 10 students look like? You know, if they started to come up with these kind of creative ideas, how would that change everything? And be open to any kind of idea out there. I know I used the word crazy before, but I reflect that. So I'm kind of crazy myself. So I see that as a positive thing. So I am just excited about what's going to happen in this process, because the conversation now is about education, and I think it's about teaching every student. And I think the one thing I would like to hear from you guys is, I had a question about the issue of widening the, let's see if I can, will this situation significantly widen or close the socioeconomic gap because of access? You know, I mean, I think that this could be, we've been striving for getting past this digital divide. Is this a time where that'll widen, or is this a time where we're going to force it, door close? Any thoughts?
Well, I think, I guess I hope, you know, morally and ethically, we have a responsibility to work to close that, right? To build that bridge. So I hope that, I really hope that's what happens. I hope that everyone, I mean, that's going to take everyone being involved though, right? From legislators, I mean, you know, government officials, people passing the laws, saying what money can be spent on, different things like that. But I do think that really it's a moral obligation for us to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I was encouraged by what the governor said in his press conference in terms of, we're waiving fees and late fees and, looking at ways we can keep, the power on and things like that for people. So my fear is that it's going to widen it. My hope is that, in particular with the digital divide, it closes it, but just in general, we find a way to keep it from widening a lot, that people will step up. And we've seen it with professional athletes and team owners already, with paying for the salaries of people who work in the concessions areas, of stadiums where games have been canceled. I think we just need to really, as a nation, look at what ways can we help out the people that are around us, to make sure that nobody does slide off that, off that slope, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'll dive in here just for a moment. I think it's a tremendous time of opportunity, too, for redefining education beyond only brick and mortar, and only within a given time frame. I was loving listening to Lex earlier and where Bendable is heading, and this idea that learning, acquiring knowledge and skills and competencies throughout the community, throughout the day, beyond the school day, the traditional day, and acknowledging that broader definition of learning and inviting our kids at many levels to dive into learning in a different way, even beyond just the concept of project-based in our classrooms, community-based and life-based learning that's connected into our learning environments that ultimately supports our industries, supports our communities, supports each of these students as they become really leaders within their own homes. I think we have a real opportunity here to unleash the very best in our kids, and I think allowing those students to have that voice and for us to listen and respond, I think in this moment could be powerful.
Okay. Hey, Tom, I got one more question that was on the chat session I thought was kind of interesting.
Okay, John.
Much of the things you are describing are one-on-one, which creates an enormous drain on teacher time. What is needed are plans that replicate how one teacher can interact with many students at the same time. And I'll add to that. I mentioned I'm working with 60 kids right now. Fortunately, I have a really good LMS system. I can communicate and stuff with that. I can do individual. I can watch what they're doing, all those kind of things. But I keep thinking, geez, what if I had 180? And what if I had 6 preps? And what if it becomes very burdensome to do that high level interaction. What are your thoughts on developing systems and processes and support even for teachers in this environment? Is that where some of the clerical staff could even help out, or some guidance staff or some other aid staff could help out teachers? Thoughts?
And students, I might add, right?
Oh,
as a resource for helping teachers. Because depending on where you are, probably at a great many levels, starting I don't know, 4th grade, 5th grade these days, you've got communicators, you've got kids who are chatting with each other all the time. Right?
We probably have 2 million pre-service teachers that are not in school right now. So
yeah. Oh, another resource, you bet.
Yeah. Thoughts, anybody?
All good questions. We should probably wrap. It's been a very rich day. Again,
Hey, Tom, I had one comment from Larry, and he said, I kind of like the comment. Make sure I get it here. He said, we are the ones that are working on it. People in the future will look back at this and say, wow, these people did great. This is our Apollo 13 moment.
May we live up to it. Thank you, everybody. John, thank you particularly for assembling this panel. Jennifer, and Shannon from Indiana Department of Education, thank you. You're up to your eyebrows and alligators, as they say, and you took time out to be with us. Ken and Chad and so many others who I don't have a chance to thank here specifically, who joined us for the day. Thank you very much. So many educators who are scrambling themselves, whether at the top of some heap or right in the trenches with the classroom to make all this work. So thanks for your generosity. Let me end on a business point or two. Count on this being disseminated at the first level to everybody who registered or everybody who presented. What I mean by disseminated is a digital copy of the chat and individual copies of each of the session recordings. We'll make sure that gets around. I think it would be helpful to share a number of these things in some of our sub-circles. So if you know somebody who you wish or you would have loved to have heard from them in a session, et cetera, feel free to reach out and push these. I can't tell you precisely where they're going to land, but I promise you that they will land, and I will tell you where in terms of posting these things.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Chad here. I think we'd be remiss not to take just a second or two to thank you and your team at Notre Dame for assembling us and pulling us together. Really appreciate your drive and dedication over a long period of time. Just thank you very much for all that you do and are doing and leading the charge in this new world of connection between workforce and education. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks to folks who were drafted last minute. Stephen Cabley, who's been in the background, who was up to his eyebrows in work as well, and just decided to come in on Wednesday to sort of watch and make sure things didn't fail technically. Richard Allen, who came in to Notre Dame today for ND Studios. They have been remarkable, actually. At one point, there were 1,300 Notre Dame videos still stuck in the Zoom queue for recording, just to give you an idea of the level of busyness that they've had as they've hopped on to Zoom. So it was very kind of them to take time and help us here. Again, we couldn't thank each other enough, so we'll have to quit. Wonderful. I'm not going to shut down chat for a bit, but I do think that we should say goodbye from a formal point of view. We'll close the recording, but not the chat.